Hi sir, my name is Jeremy Arleo Orquillas and I am from Group 3. We are here to discuss the self from perspective of anthropology. First, we are here to tackle about the learning outcomes. After the learning sessions, the students are able to first is to determine the different aspects in life and how it deals in cultural context. Second, determine the dimension of cultural variation and how it linked to self. And third is examine the different influences and factors that shape the self. The self and the person in self in differing cultural contexts. When you say self, it is a consistable statement made by a person overtly or covertly, which include the word I, me, mine, and myself. The study of the self has a long tradition in psychology, anthropology, and sociology. So we are here to focus about the psychology in the aspect of anthropology. So anthropology is a study of human being. So which is focused to psychology, psychology more on minds. So there is a recognition in the most of these discussions that self is shaped in part through interaction with groups. So how do people or you or self behave on the community or the society? And also, however, there is evidence about variation of the self across cultures. The specifications of the way the self-determination aspects of social behavior in different cultures is undeveloped. To the extent such aspects are shared by people who speak a common language and who are able to interact because they live in adjacent location during the same historical period. Example, which is from millennials can understand kapwa millennials. So a ancient from the past can understand the ancient because the way of living, the language they speak, and what the society is before, they can adapt before and now so that they can adapt by itself. And also we can refer to all of these elements as a cultural group's subjective culture. Subjective cultures is the tangible part of culture which include ideas, attitudes, assumptions, and beliefs. So, subjective culture is a culture that cannot be seen, cannot be touched, or a physical thing. It is a more an emotion, aspects in life, the way we live, and more on self cultures. The self indicates all social aspects, social motivations that link to the self. Example, attitudes. Attitudes are ideas complicated by mixed cognitive emotional factors, and they differ considerably across cultures. So attitudes, it is in your deep in yourself how the way you interact with others. So the emotional expressions can be called a attitude. So in beliefs, something you praised or something you believe that it will happen. And intentions is something you intend to be, just like as a marine student. Your main intention in life is to finish your studies. And norms and rules are behavioral guidelines. So norms are expectations in life. Expectation, and it can be as we expected to be a marine someday. And rule in society, just like us, we are a student, a citizen in this country. Others are fathers, mothers, parents, and something to do with the society. And values, what we have care about. So it happen in the good side values. First of all, before we before we introduce the three aspect of the self, um, we should know who is the founder or who builds the aspects of the self. Um, this is Harris C. Triandes, um, professor at the Department of Psychology of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, considered as a pioneer of cross-cultural psychology, and his research focused on the cognitive aspects of attitudes, norms, rules, and values in different culture. So, Dr. or Mr. Harry Triandes focused on self, that he established the three aspects of the self, which is the private self, public self, and collective self. When you say private self, is it an assessment? It is an assessment by the self, or also people became aware of some aspect of themselves, but only in a private way. Also, a part of a person's awareness know only to themselves. The private self is the only one aware of true feelings and self-worth. Cognitions that involve traits, states of behavior of the persons. So, example, it is a think the way you think that you can a question that you yourself can answer. Just for example, I am introverted. I will buy something good. I am honest. I will go. So something that yourself can. Public self. It is corresponds to an assessment of the self by generalized of others. It is the view of oneself by others conveyed through public informations, public actions, and interactions with others. Also, it is the view of oneself by others as conveyed through public information. Cognitions concerning the generalized others' view of the self. So, public self is something that others notices or did not understand the way you feel, or something to say, people that has something to say on you. Just for example, um, people say I am rude, people say I will buy this thing, and people say I am honest. And that is the example of public self. Collective self corresponds to an assessment of the self by specific reference of groups. Collective self consists of those aspects of the self that are based on membership in social groups or categories. Cognitions concerning a view of the self that is found in some collective. So example, a group of like us, students, teachers, professors, seamen, the way they think on you, or the way you show your attitudes or aspects to them. Such for example, my classmate my classmate thinks that I am genius. My teacher says that I am rude, or something that my parents says I have a good grades.
Hi, my name is Joe Maritisa. They have three dimensions of cultural variation. First, individualism and collectivism. Second, tightness, looseness, and last is cultural complexity. So, we'll start in individualism. So, what is individualism? Individualism is all about taking care of yourself. It is the belief and practice that every person is unique and self-reliant. In individualism, each individual is sovereign. Everybody has the same right. People are responsible for themselves and large laws and flexible social groups. So, in individualistic culture, people are responsible for themselves. People are free to pursue their own lives with as little interferences as possible from outside. Individual rights and equality in the law along with privacy are essential practice of these kinds of cultures. Every single individual is sovereign to themselves and they are only abstracted when they interference. The example of individualism is when you support yourself financially and do not depend anyone else for your needs. So, in other words, you are independent. Next is collectivism. So, here in collectivism, individuals are subordinate to the group. More important member of the group enjoy certain privilege. The collective takes care of weaker members and fix social groups. So, in collective culture, the well-being of the group is given priority over the individuals that belong to them. In collective culture, the group is responsible for the action of the individual as well as their safety and welfare. So, here's the example of so here's the example of collectivism. Having a families and friendship groups is important in their societies, and people may sacrifice their happiness or time for the benefit of someone else or for greater good of a group. So, in other words, this culture is about dependent. They dependent to each other.
I'm Kent Emmanuel Requinto Cariolin. Tight loose cultures. Tight cultures, from its word tight, a culture that is fixed in nature. Homogeneous or cultural homogenization, it is refers to the reduction of cultural diversity through the population and diffusion of a wide array of cultural symbols, not only in physical but also in customs, ideas, norms, and values. It has a specific cultural identity than others but has a wide scope. Collective self are usually people who are engaging or relying on their membership in social groups or categories. People are more likely to follow the majority that can make or produce a unity on a one society. For example, in the Philippines, we usually use Tagalog language to communicate, and most of us are Catholic. Also, we adopt the universal language to communicate well to the foreign citizens or the foreigners, or to the people inside the country or outside the country. And it is also usually used in the offices or works. Loose culture. As all we know, loose are things that is not firmly fixed, or could we say the opposite in a tight culture. Heterogeneous or cultural heterogeneity can be refers to the several differences in cultural identity, either in class, ethnicity, language, tradition, religion, sense of place, and other cultural aspects. These differences can make us hard to understand the people or difficult to communicate, and it is more time to trust, but it is more take time to trust others and cooperate. Private self are usually people or individual can choose self-styles they want to be. For example, the Philippines is a one country but has a lot of different cultures. As a Filipino, I hardly understand to communicate with other Filipino that has a different language or dialect than me. And also, we have a different beliefs. That's why it is hard to cope when you are talking to a different person with different languages. And also, that person or another person that are freely to choose what culture, for example in the Philippines, they are freely to choose what culture they want. Maybe If it is both tight and loose culture, it simply means that people applying the two of cultures in their daily life. Public self are people means to act properly but they do not act correctly. It can be explained that in public people are act properly but not to act correctly because there's something that people want to have more. It is not correct in our culture that we need more. When we say about culture, people can freely choose to the cultures that they prefer to. People can simply choose to be both. It's like when choosing both, people could be neutral or they can be anxious on what should they do. The outcome can be the private self, and the private self can't be and the private self can't be matter anymore. The private self and public are quietly different. As Doi 1996 discussed in this point, extensively comparing the Japanese public self with the private self, he suggested that in the United States, there is virtue in keeping public and private consistent. In Japan, proper actions matter. What you feel about such an action is irrelevant. Thus, the Japanese do not like to state their personal opinions, but rather seek consensus. Consistently with Doi's arguments in Ewell's research, she presented scenarios to Japan and Americans and asked them to judge various actions that could be appropriate response to these situations. For example, the one scenario. A daughter bring home a person that are from the other race. It is included as a possible response, though that he would never allow them to marry but told them he was in favor of their marriage. The response was endorsed as the best by 44% of the Japanese sampled but by only 2% of the Americans, it was the worst in opinions of 48% of the Americans. And 7% of the Japanese. Although the private self may be complex, does not mean that it is well communicated to others. If one can avoid communications, in fact, in today's culture, people avoid disclosing much of themselves because the disclosing they may reveal some aspect of the self that others might be citizens. In other words, they may be aware of the demands of the generalized and avoid being vulnerable to criticism representing little of this complex self to others. It simply means that other culture will not accept others, but some cultures will gladly to accept other cultures. Cultural complexity. From the word complex, this one is on pattern or chemistry in every lifetime of a person, or it is based on their race through the complexity of life. Usually, this kind of people are people that is more on private self and neglects the collective and public self. Dragonas in 1983 says that the more complex the city, the more confusing the identity, similarly to Kataki in 1976. As the best example in this is the life of the farmers and fishermen, because usually the children that is raised from being farmer or fisherman can only say that they can't go to other but only on going to become a farmer or being a farmer or fisherman. And it is common in the Philippines in barangay or sitio because those people or children can't afford or yes, can't afford to become a better person because of the poverty that they are facing in their daily life.
I'm Jason Baya. Egocentric. Each person is capable of acting independently from others. Sociocentric. The self exists as an entity only within the concrete situations or roles occupied by the person.
I am Carmedel M. Alcantara. Jules Salazar is a Filipino historian, anthropologist, and philosopher of history. Jules Salazar was born on April 20, 1934, and best known for pioneering an emic perspective in Philippine history called Pantayong Pananaw, the We Perspective. A history professor from the History Department of the University of the Philippine Diliman, and considered as the father of Pantayong Pananaw.
Hi, I'm Ethan Gabriel and Francisco. Pantayong pananaw as a descriptive concept can pertain to any social collectivity which possesses a relatively unified and internally articulated linguistic cultural structure of communication and interaction and or a sense of oneness of purpose and existence. It is also defined as a method of acknowledging the history and development of the nation based on the internal interconnectedness or interrelationships. The core of the Pantayong Pananaw lies in the internal interrelationships and the interrelating of the characteristic, values, aims, knowledge, wisdom, practices, behavior, and experiences as a unified whole. Tayo, which means we, the plural form for the first person pronoun, and the prefix pan, which means for, while pananaw, which means perspective in English. It is understood as a single term. Pantayong pananaw means for us perspective, or in modern translation, from us for us. Dr. Salazar used tayo as a basis for the theoretical base of the perspective and not the pronoun kami, because according to Dr. Salazar, the refers to we speaking to others as opposed to the former, which means we speaking among ourselves. 5 details about Pantayong Pananaw. This course within the indigenous tradition developed by Dr. Zeus Salazar, considered as the most theoretical, advanced, and productive in terms of numbers of research outputs on the indigenous of the social science. A response to the Western perspective of the study of Philippines history and historiography. It introduces a communication-based theoretical innovation on the study of Philippine historiography.
Pantayong Pananaw as a closed circuit. Importance of having our own dialect. Nakapingid na pag-uugnayan, pakikipag-ugnayan. Ang mga kalagayan, konsepto, kaisipan, at ugali ay nakapaloob sa sariling lipunan at kalinangan na ipinapahiwatig sa wikang Pilipino. This is an implicit that connects Filipino people and just Filipino people only. It means that foreign people are not included. The people itself understand each other easily because the scenario, concepts, way of thinking are involved in our own culture. It is written in Filipino language to be understandable, especially just for us. The pantayang pananaw seeks to create a closed circuit of interaction between academic discourse, especially history, and kaalamang katutubo, indigenous knowledge. In this regard, language plays a central role, a unity that is framed by and expressed in single language that is a self-direct discourse of progress and civilization. Pangkaming pananaw. The authenticity of the Filipino in the encyclopedia publication is vague and not woven into the common vision that can unite the country. According to Salazar, the pangkaming pananaw in encyclopedia, both new and old, are true. The elites are giving importance of interest, opinions, and better understanding about us and our culture. So basically, there is no difference in Filipino heritage and in encyclopedia.